Hello everybody, today I just wanted to talk about should you play the Barbarian in Season 1, pros and cons of the Barbarian, and things that you can expect when you play the Barbarian. So the first thing I'm going to say about the Barbarian is it is a class that requires a decent amount of working parts in order to function at the highest level. However, that being said, the cool thing about the Barbarian is a lot of the main aspects you need come from the Codex of Power. So there is going to be a couple things that you're missing, but for the most part, you can actually play a lot of different Barb builds just out of the Codex, and they're going to translate really well into the end game. So this is the Hoda Barb, for example. I have a leveling guide for this and a leveling build for the Hoda Barb, but you can see here that this is from the Codex, this is from the Codex, this is also from the Codex, this is also from the Codex, this is not from the Codex. This is from the Codex, this is a main one as well, right? Hammer of the Ancients quakes outwards and it turns your Hammer of the Ancients into an AoE ability. You can get this from the Codex, you can get this from the Codex. I do not have the current thing that I would need for this because you need temerity pretty much in order to run what you're supposed to run on this. I don't have it yet, but this is also from the Codex as like a filler. Then this also comes from the Codex, this comes from the Codex, this does not come from the Codex, right? So there's maybe, I think for the Hoda Barb, for example, I think there's 3 legendary aspects that do not come from the Codex. So the first one's going to be the conceded aspect. It's going to give you a percent damage buff whenever you have a barrier. However, if you don't have temerity, you don't really have an insane amount of access to barrier unless you run Iron Skin. So it's not necessarily needed right away. And then you also have the aspect of limitless rage. Each point of fury you generate while at max fury is going to grant your next core skill 30 to 60% increased damage, stacking up once you hit max fury. Now this one is a pretty big multiplier. However, you have to remember that as you're leveling up, you don't necessarily need that much damage, so it's actually not that big of a deal that you don't have this yet. Later on in the game, yes, it'll be a big deal, but early on, not so much, right? So there's kind of some upside to all this, right? And these are all things that are ran, right? Like the majority of what I have here is all ran at the end game as well, right? So all you have to do is go run and get a dungeon in order to make this build, and it's going to be the same thing for the Whirlwind build, I believe, as well. I think the Whirlwind build might have a couple extra things that you're going to need, but for the most part, I think most of the Whirlwind build is also in there, and I think the Whirlwind build, it does actually use a unique, and it also has a utility one where it says like Whirlwind pulls things in that I don't believe you can get. But other than that, a lot of what is used in the Whirlwind build is also used from the Codex, right? So that's kind of the upside, is even though that they are extremely reliant on legendary powers, you know that you're going to be able to get a lot of those legendary powers. Now, the downside is that in order for the shouts to function, and this is what I would say is the main downside, right, is that you need Bold Chieftain's Ring. You also are going to need, like, you're going to want CDR on your helmet, you're also going to want CDR on your amulet, and then you also need Paragon. So in those things, unfortunately, you're just going to have to level up, and it's going to be kind of up to RNG if you find the Bold Chieftain's Ring, for example. And what the Bold Chieftain's Ring does is it decreases the cooldown of your shout per nearby enemy up to 6 seconds, but that's pretty big, right? Because, reducing these by 6% on top of getting cooldown on both of these, so you have 30% cooldown there, you get closer and closer to having a permanent shout up time, which is kind of the goal, is what you need, but you have to have almost perfect rolls, and you also have to have things in your Paragon tree now to do it as well. Or you have to have something like Rage of Haragath, which is a unique, right? Which you're not even going to be able to find that until level 60, which blows, but so you have something like this, right? Martial, after casting a shout skill, the active cooldown of every other shout skill is reduced by 1.2 seconds. And then you're going to need another one. It's called Disembowel. and it says whenever you kill something, I don't have it yet, but it says whenever you kill something that's bleeding, you have a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your shouts, or your non-ultimate skill, sorry, I should say, by 1 second, right? And once you have all these pieces together, you're going to have virtually a perma shout uptime, right? But the thing is that until you get there, the class is going to potentially feel maybe a little awkward, maybe a little clunky, because your resource regeneration isn't going to be exactly what it needs to be. Now, there are ways to fix it. There are a little bit of ways around it. Like, for example, I run things either like Lunging Strike, or I'll run things like Frenzy, just things that have high attack speed to try to help generate as much fury as possible and stuff like that. But because I'm not saying that the build is unfunctional without all these things, I'm just saying that you're going to notice this kind of clunky awkwardness with your resource regeneration until you have all these pieces, right? So the Barb is definitely playable, don't think that. That's definitely not what I'm trying to say or anything like that. But that being said, you know, like, it just needs some working parts when it comes to these shouts to really get it, because then it's also an upside, because when you have all these working parts, you don't actually have to run a generator in a lot of the builds, right? You can run something like Leap, Ground Stomp, whatever the heck you want here. I think Whirlwind actually replaces its generator for something like Iron Skin. So that's, you know, pretty cool, pretty fun. Now, in terms of build diversity, I want to say currently, as it stands, the best builds for the Barbarian are going to be the Whirlwind build. This one's like an S-tier farming build. Once you have this together, you're just going to fly through things. The next best, like, so like if I was putting it on like a tier list, right, so like Whirlwind's probably like S-tier, obviously. Hoda Barb's probably like B or A tier. Just to give you like an example, right? And it's also going to be pretty fast. Now, and then you also have something like Upheaval, because Upheaval and Hammer of the Ancients are played pretty much inside of the same shell. They use almost all of the same, not all, but almost all the same ones. So like they're in similar, but the thing is Hoda just has a little bit more damage percent multipliers. So I believe Hoda does a little bit more damage in Upheaval right now. But they're almost the same build. You're just kind of switching out, you know, you're just kind of switching out the flavor of what you want. If that makes sense. Deathblow isn't ran a whole lot, and then Rend is ran, but I don't think it's an insane speed farming build, but it's definitely not a bad build, and it is pretty good. But it's not god tier by any means. So those are kind of the three main builds that are being played right now. So if those appeal to you, I would recommend playing it. Keep in mind, I am making this video before the Malignant Hearts get released, so all of this could potentially change, but as it stands, if there isn't significant changes to the builds, like let's say, for example, like the Malignant Hearts is kind of a flop and it just makes the builds that are already good even better, as opposed to actually shaking up the meta and making new builds, then this is really going to be what you're looking at in terms of options. Now, obviously, you can get creative, you can try out other things. I'm not saying that they're off-meta builds. Like, for example, I think Wudijo was doing a kind of like an off-meta double swing Deathblow build that seemed to do pretty good. So there are other builds that do pretty good, but in terms of like, I guess, meta or whatever, that's kind of what you're looking at, is going to be Whirlwind, Hoda, and I think Rend. So that being said, that's kind of the pros and cons of the Barbarian. I think I did a pretty good job of describing, you know, kind of giving you at least an intro version of like what this class does and the kind of stuff you're going to be using. And also, I will say this about the class, unlike some other classes, you actually can use all the different ultimates. I think Wrath of the Berserker typically takes over and is what most people run, but until you get all the pieces together, for example CDR and stuff like that, Wrath of the Berserker really isn't all that great. So doing things like Call of the Ancients is way better. Like, I've been trying out Wrath of the Berserker, but because I don't have all the CDR and stuff I need, it doesn't really feel that great. It doesn't even feel like it's active for all that long, if I'm being completely honest. And the downtime on it is huge compared to like what Iron Maelstrom or like what Call of the Ancients would be. So yeah, but anyways, yeah, that being said, that is pretty much it in terms of, you know, my thoughts on the class. However, I will go ahead and just finish up this dungeon for you, just so you can kind of see exactly how the class works in terms of like what, for example, the build I'm running, the Hoda build, and I'll show you a little bit about like what I'm talking about when it comes to the shouts and how it feels to play when you don't necessarily have the shouts. Because you can see here, you know, I'm obviously coming through here. I'm playing at a little bit above level. Until you have all the pieces together, you're you're really not going to be able to punch a crazy amount higher, I don't think, with this build. Now, I do think with this one specifically, I was going about, with my current imperfect gear, I was going about 5 levels higher, and I was doing fine. I lowered it a little bit just for speed purposes. So it's not bad by any means, but like if you're playing something like the Necromancer, you might be punching up like way higher than what you'd be doing on this. Now keep in mind, punching up isn't that big of a deal because even though you're punching up, there's kind of a drop off in the way experience works in this game. So like once you're fighting things that are 3 levels above you, you're at the kind of optimal ratio, and you're not actually getting like an insane amount extra. That being said, unless you're being like power leveled or something like that, where you're like going like 50 levels higher or something, then you might actually see a difference. But it kind of falls off a little bit there, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong about that, but it did seem like I was noticing some type of a difference whenever I was messing around. When me and my friends are messing around doing power leveling, if you're doing like a significant jump increase of like, I don't know, 20, 30, right, it might make sense, but it's not really a huge deal to only be able to do 3 levels ahead of you in terms of XP gains. But you can kind of see that my resource regeneration is awkward, but I'm doing the dungeon just fine, right? You can kind of see I have pretty big downtime on my shouts, which is really unfortunate. Like my shouts are off, and I still have 13 on challenging. I still have Warcry, but this is with me having extremely suboptimal setup in terms of the shouts. I have no CDR yet. I literally just got this guy to 50 like today. I have no CDR yet. I got pretty lucky when I found my Limitless Rage, which is pretty nice to find that as I kind of got into tier 3. Okay. Bam. So you're definitely going to have a little bit of a time. Like this class is definitely presents a little bit of a challenge in the early game when you're leveling. But another thing you can do as well, if you want, is instead of just like starting out Barbarian, if you're playing with friends, you could start a different class that has a better leveling experience, and then once you get like some gear on that other class, and like your friends are kind of geared up, just have them power level you, so you can just kind of find all the pieces before actually having to do anything. So, because that'll really help out like a ton. Because I know I had a friend on this character, I think he was on for like, oh god, not that long, but you know, maybe like a dungeon or 2, right? And I was able to then go out and find like a pretty good weapon. So once I actually get to that level to use the weapon, it'll help like ease the pain of not having my perma shouts and stuff, just because I'll just be doing more damage. So like there are ways around it if you utilize like friends and stuff like that, but if you don't have friends, you know, it's all gravy. It's like you'll still make it. You know, people are still playing the Barb even though it's a little awkward. Okay, bam. Doing quite a bit of damage here. All my suboptimal gears and stuff. So alrighty, well, that's gonna do it for this video. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you next time. Thanks.